Hello, my beautiful soul family. I'm so excited to be here with all of you today. I see everybody is popping in, and I appreciate you for coming and spending time with us here on No Coincidences podcast. I just want to give a couple little shout outs here to our family members. We've got Mary and Kevin here. Hello, my beautiful brother and sister. Richard, thank you so much for popping in. I see you, David. Looks like we got V popping in here. And I am so excited and honored to get to introduce y'all to our guest today. He is an award-winning author. He has been on several television shows such as Ancient Aliens, The UnXplained, Alaska Triangle, The Haunted. He just had a new book come out. I'm going to get to talk to him about that today. And so without further ado, family, please welcome in Mr. Mike Ricksecker. Hi, Mike. How are you?
Hi, Cristina. Doing pretty well. Thanks for having me tonight. I appreciate it.
Oh, no problem. I'm honored to have you here. What are you talking about? So our family has been looking forward so much to finding out about your new book and finding about some of your ideas about some philosophies in our spiritual community. We here believe, obviously, by the name of the show, that there are no coincidences in life. And how do you feel about that?
Yeah, definitely. No coincidences. Definitely, things happen for a reason. And it's kind of a matter of interpreting what those reasons may be. But yeah, definitely no coincidences.
I totally agree with exactly what you're saying. Now, with your new book that just came out here, I'm going to go ahead and pop a picture up here so that everybody can see it real quick. It just came out on October 29th, I believe, correct?
Correct. Yes, 29th.
And this is called Portals to the Stars. And this is actually the second part of a series. Is that right?
Right. Yeah. The first was Travels Through Time inside the fourth dimension time travel and stacked time theory. Portals to the Stars is the second, the follow up to that. So inside Stargates, Atlantis, and Secrets of Ancient Egypt.
Nice. Those are all right up the alley that I have so many questions for you today.
Sure.
Now, what took you on this journey with your book to start talking about time travel, portals, deja vu, things of that nature?
Yeah, I mean, this goes all the way back to when I was a child. So, I was an experiencer with what we would call a shadow entity at a very young age, about 8 years old. I also had some other experiences with a different one when we moved into a new house when I was 13 and had my first little paranormal investigation the following year. And again, I remember this is like 1989. There are no ghost television shows or anything like that. So I had no idea what we were doing. But I saw some really fascinating things because it wasn't like a traditional we're going out and ghost hunting sort of thing. Basically, it was just a friend of my friend David and I were at our friend Lori's house, and she just in the middle of conversation one time said, "I think my house is haunted." So, oh, interesting. Tell us some stories, and everything was like centered around this her bedroom and this one wall that was in there where she's tacking up things and posters and what have you. And they would always fall down, whether it was like an hour, a day, a week later, whatever it was. So we're gonna go up there and check it out. And as she was telling us more about the history of the house and some other things that happened there, things that were happening in the room, my friend David put his hand flat to the wall like that, and he just turned this bright, bright red and started sweating profusely. And so I'd never seen anything like this before. I was like, "Oh my God, what's going on with my friend?"
Right.
And he started going wall to wall in the house, trying to find those kind of other quote unquote hot spots. And so that's the moment in my life where I knew I was going to be involved with this some way, shape, or form for the rest of my life, not knowing what exactly it was.
Right.
Yeah, when it comes to like ancient Egypt and time travel has always been an interest of mine, going back to the movie Somewhere in Time with Christopher Reeve and Jane Seymour. And uh, with Egypt, it was really the mysteries of the Sphinx, uh, um, special, TV special that was hosted by Charlton Heston. Was featuring the work of Robert Schoch and John Anthony West, redating the Sphinx. This was 1993, and the following year, the movie Stargate came out. I was like, okay, this stuff is just totally blowing my mind. New concepts about Egypt, and as I just kind of matured and my writing turned more into, talking about real life paranormal experiences and supernatural activity and things like that, I started to notice that there were all these connections between the supernatural activity, the nature of time, and things going on in ancient Egypt.
Right. Yeah, that's astounding. And you kind of actually answered one of my questions I had for you. I was going to ask you, when did you know that you were different than everybody else around you?
Yeah, I've always been a little different. When I was young, I was that shy, quiet kid. I was almost a full year younger than most of my classmates where I was growing up at in Massachusetts, and I was the kid that would read books on the bus,
Mhm.
so got made fun of for that. But I'd get picked on a lot, but I would also drive them nuts because I was also athletic. So we'd get out on the ball field or something, and I'd be as good, if not better, than a lot of them.
Right.
So they didn't quite care for that. Here's this quiet, brainy kid that can keep up on the ball field, and yeah, so it's always a bit different.
Yeah. I relate to that. I think the first experience I was just telling some people the other day that I actually remember as a child was I was 3 years old, and I obviously, without knowing I was doing it, I remote viewed into an animal
Oh,
that was close by to me. And then, I kind of went through life with things like that. But I think it was like in my 20s where I actually realized, like, hey, you're doing something other people don't typically do.
yeah, yeah.
So, with that, do you find that, first of all, I want to thank you for being a military veteran. I know you were in the Air Force. Thank you so much for your service.
Oh, and thank you for yours as well.
Thank you. Do you find that going through those experiences as a child led you into your military career? I know that you
Only in the sense that my best friend in high school talked me into it.
I had one of those too. We did the buddy program.
Yeah, yeah, he went in a little bit ahead of me, because he graduated a year before I did, and so, and most of my, close friends from high school, graduated a year ahead of me, so when I was a senior in high school, it's like, "Oh, man, a lot of my friends are gone." They've gone off to college and all this. Ron was still around, but he had decided that he was gonna go ahead and go into the Air Force, so he was leaving too, and so he convinced me that I should also go ahead and enlist. I was otherwise all geared up, going off to college and all that. So, yeah, he talked me into it, and 2 weeks after I graduated high school, off I
Oh
went.
my goodness, I did the same thing, off into the wild blue yonder.
Yes.
Now with your Air Force career, did you ever get to experience anything with, like, UAPs or anything like that?
So, yeah, being stationed at so I was stationed at Elmendorf Air Force Base, Alaska, and then was Fort Meade, Maryland, basically working for NSA. So I can't really talk about what I saw at NSA.
Right.
Um, in Alaska, it was kind of interesting. So I can't say I ever saw like any that I know of any UFOs, UAPs, although people did talk about it and people would ask questions and things like that. What I actually saw, and actually a number of us, so the last 2 years that I was there, the first year I was there was basically waiting for my security clearance to come in. So I was working for the Squadron Networking Center, the computer
Right.
guy. Um, Once that security clearance came in, I went across the street to the Alaska Command Building, working for Worldwide Military Command Control Systems. And we were in the basement of that building. We shared offices with the base comm center. So we would, many of us would see a lot of shadow activity moving about the center,
Mhm.
mostly in the back office area. But sometimes you'd see something slip into the rack room, or there was another room further in the back that just had some old printers and things like that, and all of a sudden you see something slip in there. And it wasn't something that you were very vocal about. Like, we would talk about, like we airmen would talk about it
Right.
amongst ourselves. But you don't take that up the chain of command, because all of a sudden
Right.
you find yourself down at mental health and you get your security clearance pulled, and all of
Mhm.
that. But it was kind of interesting. Really was like the first conversation I was having with my supervisor in that department, because he was on a TDY, or he may have taken some time off or whatever. Like when I first um, got into that shop, and it was like 2 weeks later, he finally shows up, and we go into his office so we can have a kind of get to know you type of session. And I'd already
Right.
seen a couple of things, and all of a sudden, while we're sitting there talking, I notice this shadow walk by the doorway, and he notices that I notice, and he just kind of says, "Yeah, that happens here." And that was it. And we just kept going on with the conversation. It's like, "Okay."
That's awesome. I understand there's a lot that we can't share with having security clearance is
Yeah,
obvious, but I love hearing that even just in the regular old buildings, everyday work, you got to experience that.
yeah.
Um, After you got done with the Air Force, what did you decide to do in your life?
Well, yeah, I'd had all that training in computers with the Air Force, networking and systems administration, did some programming, that sort of thing. So I got out in the middle of the big tech boom, 1998, and landed a job as a network manager for a small company. And I basically launched into this long extended career in IT, which I just stepped away from here back in February to do all of this full time.
Nice. That is awesome. I know that now you get to do a lot of stuff, like you just said, with technology. I've seen that you host the, what is it, the Stargates of the Giza? Is that right?
Yeah, the Stargates of Ancient Egypt tour. Yeah, we're going back next November. Yep.
Nice. What got you started in that?
Oh, again, I had that interest in Egypt, and I noticed a lot of my research, started taking me back further and further into the ancient world. So, when I wrote "A Walk in the Shadows: A Complete Guide to Shadow People," I really wanted to dive into the history of where ancient cultures started noticing this sort of activity. You actually find stories going back to ancient Sumer, ancient Egypt, in these locations. So it was like, okay, this is fascinating. And again, I already had that interest in ancient Egypt dating back to the early 90s, and really even further than that, because I grew up on Indiana Jones. So
Right?
um, so I was looking at a tour in 2020 through one of the guys I'd done the Alaska Triangle television show with, because he was doing some tours, and really couldn't jump on that at the time because I was busy moving, but I was all geared up for the next one. COVID hit. So it was really tenuous as to whether this tour was going to happen or not. And sure enough, June 2021, the world had started to open back up a little bit, and we were out there in Egypt for the summer solstice, June 21, inside the Great Pyramid of Giza when the sun rose. So that was really amazing, and really hot too, because Egypt in mid to late June, early July, it's scorching, but it was
Yeah,
absolutely amazing. And the tour guide and I, um, Mohammed Ibrahim, we got to talking a lot while I was on that tour, and he was like, "Yeah, I like you. We need to do some tours together." And I'm like, "Yeah, sure, let's do it." So that's
that's
where it was born.
that's awesome. So obviously, with spending a lot of time in Egypt, there's things that people say about, well, the pyramids could be stargates, they could be portals, they could be energy entities. What's your belief on that?
Yeah, the pyramids, not so much the stargates, but they could be powering the stargates. We find some smaller pyramids right next to temples that actually have the stargate symbolism within the temple, like Hatshepsut's temple, Elephantine Island, and in some of those temples. But like the Great Pyramid of Giza now. there were scientific papers that were published a few years ago that kind of backed up what we've been talking about in the metaphysical community for eons, talking about how pyramids harness the energy of the earth. And sure enough, a scientific paper finally came out and said, yes, actually, it does harness energy from the earth and store it within the building and all this. And just a few months ago here, there was a report that it actually came out of China. One of their scientific teams, it was, I believe they were using radar technology, and they had detected plasma balls above the Great Pyramid of Giza. So kind of also giving us a little bit more proof that yes, the Great Pyramid is definitely harnessing energy, and if it apparently is creating plasma balls too.
Right.
So that the question from there becomes, okay, if it's harnessing energy, what is it using it for? And there's a lot of speculation as to what that might be. Christopher Dunn has his Giza power plant theory and all that, and inside the Great Pyramid of Giza, it does very much look like a machine. I don't know if a power plant in the traditional sense, like Chris is talking about, but I do believe a lot of his different concepts with it. Because you go into the Queen's chamber, he calls it a chemical reaction chamber because there's like some salt buildup on the walls and things like this. But there's a corbelled niche that's in there, and traditional archaeology tries to tell us, well, this is where like a statue or an idol or something like this was. Now, this corbelled niche, for some strange reason, has a passageway that goes about 90 feet back inside the pyramid. And then the back wall of this niche, as it goes up about 15 feet, it's burned, it's charred, and the stone is partially melted. So it's like something extremely hot was here and burning. So no, it just
Right.
wasn't holding a statue. So yeah, the Great Pyramid is definitely fascinating. It's definitely a conductor for energy.
Um, Lori made a comment. She said, "I've come to learn that many she's saying intellectual, educated individuals believe Egypt is alien in origin. Other life forms worked alongside humans to build and create the unexplainable." And I know a lot of my followers, they're kind of on the same level as my
Mhm.
thinking, where it goes back to the Anunnaki and
Yeah.
things of that nature. So thank you for that, Lori. And Julie says that it's amazing to experience the pyramids in real life. I would love
Definitely.
to be able to go do that.
Well, come
Um,
with us on the tour next year.
yes, hey, I'm in. You don't have to tell
Awesome.
me twice. So have you heard? I know there's been a little rumor out there for several years about crystal pyramid structures in the Atlantic Ocean. Have you heard that rumor?
Crystal pyramid structures in the Atlantic?
Yes.
No, I've heard of some different cube-like structures and things like that, but not pyramids. Yeah, so
So
that was a little new on me.
yeah, I heard something about that and I was like, okay, is it linked to the pyramids or is this just something that someone's
Well,
making up to get some hype?"
and that is always a possibility, of course. There's a lot of do you believe everything on the internet? The internet's totally true, right?
Hey,
Everything
everything on the internet is the truth, 100%. That's what I was
right.
told back in the early '90s, and I'm sticking to it.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So, yeah, whenever you hear something like that, you have to take it with a grain of salt, but then, do some follow-up research, like, just okay, is this legitimate? Where's the proof for it? And try to dive into all of that. So, we know that there is a lot hidden under the oceans. The sea levels have risen about 130 feet since the end of the Younger Dryas era when we started having that warming trend, and
Right,
the ice started to melt. So there's a lot that's hidden under there. Plus, when we talk about like the Great Cataclysm, what essentially ended a lot of civilizations, the Great Flood, it ended Atlantis, and almost every culture on Earth has this story. So
right,
we know something happened. So, yeah, there are cities that have been absolutely lost to time, and technologies hidden out there that we would love to have today. And I believe that like the Great Pyramid of Giza and some of these other structures, there are evidence of that because they're different than the dynastic buildings, like a lot of the temples, in that, like the Great Pyramid and some of the other ones, they don't have any hieroglyphs. And when you look at the structures that were built by the dynastic Egyptians, hieroglyphs cover them completely. So you can really tell that there's a distinct difference here. And well, and even there are a lot of Egyptians that will tell you, you know, we found these here. We repurposed them and we made them our own, but they were from our predecessors, which would be that Atlantean civilization that did
Right.
spread across a good part of the world.
Yeah, for sure. Kevin Emery has a question
Mhm.
here. He says, Mike, are the triangles the same types of portals as the pyramids, or are they different forms to other dimensions?
Yeah, so the triangles, I'm guessing he's talking about like the Bermuda Triangle, Alaska Triangle, that sort of thing.
Yeah,
Yeah, these are like major hotspot areas on the globe that are like really supercharged, and a lot of strange activity can happen there, whether that's supernatural activity, missing people, missing airplanes. A lot of UFO activity seems to be attracted to these type of areas and that sort of thing. And really what's happening here is it all starts at the core, like literally the Earth's core, where it's a molten ball of iron that's spinning around and around, creating
right.
a massive electromagnetic field, which is good for us because that magnetic shield protects us from the solar wind. Otherwise, we'd been fried a long time ago.
Exactly.
Yeah. But as that magnetism passes through the Earth's mantle in the crust, it's interacting with different metals and minerals. And depending on the type of metal and mineral and how large the deposit is, it will create these different localized electromagnetic fields. And so some of these that are, really, really strong, like the Bermuda Triangle, Skinwalker Ranch, I believe, has something significant under the earth there in these other triangle areas, or even like a place like Sedona. That's essentially what's going on here.
Right. You mentioned about the electromagnetic and do you think that when, like, I know we've had a ton of solar flares going off this year, and I mean they've even gotten up to X class of, I think we got like a X8 or an X9 at one point. Do you think that when we have these solar flares, it affects that magnitude?
Yeah, absolutely. And a place like Alaska, with the Alaska Triangle, I mean, I call it like a different, or I call it like a cocktail of different energies, because yeah, you have the electromagnetism of the Earth there, which they in the 1960s did the U.S. Department of the Interior did a electromagnetic survey there, and classified 5 different magnetic characters, and some of these they classified as negative anomalies. So they know something's going on up there. But then you have seismic activity. There's a lot of earthquakes up there. I was up there for 6.7. There's volcanic activity there. It was 2 months before I got up there to Alaska that a volcano had just gone off right across the Cook Inlet from
Wow.
Anchorage, Mount Spur. Yeah. And actually, they have found here recently, a few years ago, an ancient caldera there around the Aleutian Islands. And that's why those couple of volcanoes there are so active. And then, yes, you have the solar flares that bombard that area, because at our poles, the magnetic shield is a little bit thinner. So that's why you have those really magnificent auroras there when it hits the ionosphere. And so, yeah, you have this just fantastic cocktail of different energies there that causes so much more of this activity to happen.
Right. Now you mentioned the polls. Answer if you can, of course. What do you think they really found in Antarctica?
Ah, okay. Yeah, there's a lot that is supposed to have been found there. So, UFOs, people talk about UFO bases there. People point back to like the Nazis, and why did Hitler send them down to Antarctica? The going story is that they were trying to establish a whaling industry, because this is back when we used whales for oil, unfortunately.
Right.
Um, but they were buying that type of oil off of Norway, so they were trying to establish something. But those whaling industries were established at South Georgia Island, not Antarctica. So it's really odd why they went to Antarctica. Then you have the stories about Admiral Byrd and what he may have actually discovered. And so after he had died, his a diary of his was found by his son. It had this fascinating story of him flying into this massive cave near the South Pole. And as he flew deeper into this cave, all of a sudden there was this lush green vegetation, and he discovered this crystalline city. And all of a sudden, these disc-shaped objects took remote control of his plane, landed him, and they escorted him out of the plane into this other side cave where there was their master. And
Right.
so he wanted uh, Admiral Byrd to bring back a message to the U.S. government to basically knock it off with the nuclear weapons. So so yeah, it's a really fascinating story, and people wonder if, is that really true? Is it just, because it sounds, really, like science fiction and all that. Now, this whatever cave that he flew into, I mean, this could have been, some sort of portal, some sort of Stargate, that sort of thing. People say, well, lush vegetation in Antarctica. Well, we do know that there's geothermal venting there. That's why, like Lake Vostok, it's this massive lake. It's about the same size of Lake Ontario and far deeper. That's under 2.5 miles worth of ice, but yet it's liquid because of the geothermal venting underneath, keeping it warm. So, that could be where this, vegetation came from in this cave that he flew into. So, um, hard to know, of course, if it's true, because access to Antarctica is very, very limited. And if this was more of like a Stargate that he flew into, well, difference between a Stargate and a portal. Portals are really more randomly occurring in nature, where a Stargate is something that an intelligent being can actually control that portal activity.
Right. We have a couple of very good
Mhm.
questions. The first one comes from Greg Relic or excuse me,
Yeah.
Greg Ogles from Relic Films. If I could get
Yeah.
that right. I'm so sorry, friend, Greg. um, do you think there is anything to the rumors of the Black Pyramid in Alaska?
Yeah, Black Pyramid is an interesting story. The problem is, there's nothing physical to really look at, because if the Black Pyramid story is true, it's underground. It's under uh, Mount Denali and that range of mountains there. So it's not something you can just fly over and say, "Oh yeah, there it is. It's down there." So we are just basically going on the anecdotal evidence or anecdotal stories that have come out of there. So I can't say one way or another if it truly is there, and we really have to wait for more evidence to come forth on that.
Yeah, of course. The next question comes from Jose Sanchez. He asked, are you familiar with the TR3B Black Mantra, and what is your opinion about these and other black triangular UFOs?
Yeah, yeah, definitely familiar with the TR3B. Had Darcy Weir on my show a couple years ago talking about that. Of course, I usually bring him on whenever he has a new film come out, but yeah, it's really interesting phenomenon. I mean, really, any of the UFO phenomena like that, the triangles seem to be ones that are a little bit more prevalent. You have a lot of people report the like time loss when they encounter these, and to me, a lot of these time loss scenarios, when you have like a UFO abduction and these sorts of things, if you get into like my time travel work, these are really time related incidents where they are taken into another dimension above ours, because our consciousness is on the fourth dimension, which is time, and there's
Right.
up to 11 hyperspatial dimensions. So those 5, 6, 7, 8 and onward are outside of time. So um, if you have these beings that are taking you into another dimension like that, time is going to work very differently. And you see this even in some of our ancient culture. from like fairy lore and things like that, where people disappeared into these different realms, and to them it seemed like 5 minutes, and they were actually gone a day, a couple days, or whatever.
Right. Yeah. And when you were talking about that, it actually reminded me of a show. I actually think it might have been on Ancient Aliens, where they were talking about two gentlemen who were in the Air Force. They were out scouting the grounds and they come upon a spherical entity. And one of the guys had codes like embedded into his brain. He said it felt like time stood still while he was around the entity. And then he's went on, I want to say it was like 20 or 30 years, and these numbers were in his head and they actually wrote them all down and they came up with something. It was amazing.
Yeah, it sounds like you're talking about Jim Peniston and the Rendlesham Forest
Yes.
incident. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, no, I know Jim. Yeah, fascinating story, and it turned out to be binary code. And yeah, time had stood still. He calls it the sphere of influence, and it was basically it was a triangular craft. And when he got close to it, and it was kind of hovering there on well, I say hovering, but to him it looked like it was hovering, but really it had a couple of legs that kind of pressed down into the ground. They were actually able to get casts of that. And when he was in what he calls the sphere of influence, he was looking around. The couple other guys that were with him just kind of like stood still, like they weren't moving, like they were stuck in place. And he saw these like these hieroglyphs that were on the side of the craft, and he put his hand on it, and that's when he got that download of the data. And then when he did get back to the security center there, his watch, the time on his watch was off from the clock on the wall.
Wow, that's amazing. And, that kind of takes us to another thing that I was going to ask you about. So, I know you also talk a lot about things that happen in the 4D. For people who don't know, that's in your dream state. And do you think that when they encounter these entities, that it puts people into a sort of 4D realm? Or how
Well,
do
I
you think
mean,
that works?
yeah. So they're essentially taking somebody into, if it's an abduction type scenario, in many cases, they're taking them to another dimension. Now, they could stay, within our current one and literally take them physically somewhere. But I believe a lot of these, because of that, the time loss that's included within it, I do believe that they're taking them to some other dimension where space and time is just going to work differently. Um, in our sleep state, yeah, we enter into all these different brainwave states,
Right.
and our consciousness in those states can become free floating, tap into these different frequencies that can lead us on to these other points in time. And basically, we haven't really gotten to stack time theory or anything like that, but basically, all time is concurrent. It's all here, past, present, and future. And I liken it every moment like a stack and a giant stack of photos. So take where you're sitting right now, and every moment that has happened, that is happening, and will happen, all right there, each moment like a photo in this stack. So, real time travel, or like when we have a time slip or something like that, is when two of those moments resonate the same frequency for a moment, and you get to see one for a while. So in our brainwave state, we're able to tap into those frequencies a little bit more easily, because we're kind of devoid of the physical body in a sense in those cases, when
Right.
our consciousness elevates like that. And that's when we're able to actually go and visit some of these other moments in time, and bring them back with us. And that's why we'll have like premonitions and things like that.
Of course, right. And so I feel like I'm kind of going a little off of where I wanted to go. I love when
Okay.
conversations do this. When you're talking about time stacking, it makes me think of how science is trying to prove wormholes for latent terms, right? And they talk about how and tell me if I get this wrong. They talk about how when we bend um, We bend, I'm sorry, I'm
Space and
lost for
time,
words
yeah.
right space and
Yeah,
time,
we're
yes,
talking
when
about
we bend space
Einstein-Rosen
and
bridge,
time,
yeah.
yeah.
Mhm.
And they're talking about when that happens, you're able to travel from one place to a completely different dimension or time or whatever. Do you think that that's kind of something that happens with us when we go into that 4D, or is that something that we would have to experience physically?
Yeah, we're not really going into a wormhole necessarily there. We're just kind of accessing another. I mean, all those dimensions are around us, right? So we're really just tuning in our frequency to another dimension that's right here with us right now. It's kind of like tuning a radio.
Right,
The Einstein-Rosen bridge is trying to bring us physically to another place. It is like you described, where you're taking 2 points that are at some distance from each other. You know, we generally talk about, traveling the cosmos for us to get from Earth to another galaxy somewhere. We can't do that physically,
right.
just using our regular Newtonian physics. We would die long before we ever got anywhere.
Mhm.
Um, so the idea is to take those 2 points in space, bend space and time. That's the trick. How do you bend space and time
Right.
to bring those 2 points closer together and then join them with a tunnel to be able to travel from one to the other? Now,
Mhm.
they are attempting these sorts of things in the lab. Fermilab a couple years ago stated that at the quantum level, that they were able to create a small wormhole, basically connecting 2 small black holes via a wormhole in the lab and passing a message through. So very, very small, basic sort of level here in a quantum system, but this is something they are trying to do. Yeah.
Yeah, I do believe I actually read that in your book where you were talking about that happening, and there were people that were asking, "Well, do can we pass a dog through it? Can we
Right.
pass a human through it?" And it's like, "No, we're years off from being able to do things
Right.
like that."
Well, and why would a dog be your go-to? I mean, we're gonna send a living organism through it. It's like, really, is this, archaic when we sent the chimp up into space and all that? Gosh. Um, or, what the Russians did with their dogs, which was horrible. Yeah, let's send a probe through first, you know?
Right,
Come on.
right. So my friend Kev, who he's very talkative today, he says the layer system you speak of is exactly how it happens when I view. He is an excellent remote viewer, and him and I have the same concept as what you're talking about. Everything
Mhm.
happens; it's all stacked, and it's all
Yeah,
the past, present, future. And so I love going remote viewing and knowing that I can go look at the future or the past, or and I'm right here.
yeah.
Um, so for our viewers who don't know the difference between these things, can you explain to them what the difference is between like astral projecting and remote viewing and maybe déjà vu?
Yeah, I'll start with deja vu. It's kind of the easier one right now because we just, talked about dreams and premonitions, and deja vu a lot of times is when we have our dreams, a lot of times we just retain fragments and pieces and things like that. We might even start telling, right when you wake up, you might tell your significant other, oh, I was just having this crazy dream where I was doing this, that, and wait, and you just suddenly can't remember most of what you were just dreaming about. So you just have these little pieces and fragments. So sometimes when we bring back that information, where we've gone to go visit, sometimes we might have a nice, beautiful, full premonition. Other times it might just be very, very fragmented, and it doesn't quite stick in our minds. But yet we'll, a week later or whatever it is, go there. It's like, this is really familiar, and it's because you still have a piece that you're retaining from that. So it turns out to be like this deja vu moment. There's also another way to look at deja vu. So, if all time is concurrent, ever present, and everything that has happened, is happening, and will happen right here, right now, and you believe in reincarnation, that means you could go to a historic building that maybe you had a past life in, and you might be right there, right now, as 2 different lives in the same space, which is kind of bizarre to think about, but certainly could happen. And so that might be why something seems so familiar to you, because not only may have, and a lot of people are like that too, like, oh yeah, I had past life here, so I have this, deja vu moments, and that's fine. But you may actually be there right with your past life self in that moment. So kind of interesting to think about. Where the other, you had two other elements there that you wanted me to
I'm
talk
so
about.
sorry.
Astral
Astral projection.
projection
Yes.
and remote viewing. Yeah, to me, in a lot of ways, they are related. Um, with remote viewing, I mean, you're kind of this is my take because I've never remote viewed myself. My take is that, you're physically there, but you are seeing across the world, or even across the cosmos. Some people say that they're able to see, some event that is happening.
Right.
You're able to describe a location, this sort of thing. Where with astral projection, you're actually projecting your consciousness there. Your consciousness is actually there in the moment rather than back at home just seeing it.
Exactly. Yeah, and you're right with those two. I know I've dabbled in remote viewing. I'm definitely not going to consider myself an expert in it, but it is a huge difference because I'm able to sit here and consciously be in my presence, but looking somewhere else. Where with the astral projection, I'm sending my energy, my orb, whatever people want to call it, to a specific place to experience something.
Right.
Thank you for going with that. We have people over in the comments talking about how science does everything except for consider the facts. And Twisted says, Twisted science itself is less scientific and revolves around evolving theories and technologies. It's a misnomer to label science as science. It's ever changing, ever challenged. And I have a saying
Well,
here where I say, if science and spirituality align, that's where we find the perfect match. That's my belief.
yeah, I mean, you'll find in so many cases throughout science where they will, call something a theory, and I'm trying to think of an example offhand, but in any case, this theory, that theory, whatever, but they treat it like law. Like, even though they're calling it, even though its title is a theory, they're stating it's or they're treating it like it's a law. And you have in so many cases today where they will label something as pseudoscience. And back 100 years ago, what was pseudoscience then is now what they're calling science. So it takes a lot to kind of break through those barriers. And I used this analogy the other day on another podcast. And it's like hundreds of years ago, if you did things like heard voices, if you bilocated, if you levitated, these sorts of things, and you were clergy within the church, you were okay. It was all good because you were, hearing God's voice, or maybe it was the Virgin Mary or something like that that you were hearing and speaking with. And bilocating was okay because you're proselytizing wherever you're bilocating to, and these sorts of things. As long as you were within the church, you were good because it was of God. But if you were outside the church, it was witchcraft and you're getting hung or burned at the stake. So
Right.
it's kind of the same now, where you have a lot of people that are like investigative journalists. Like me, I don't necessarily call myself an investigative journalist. I just call myself a researcher and a writer. But somebody like Graham Hancock, he is an investigative journalist. He started his degree as a professional journalist, writing for newspapers and magazines and things like that. And then he, discovered all these other things and started writing his books and just diving deep. And because he's not of the scientific establishment, they're doing the same thing to him. They are essentially burning him at the stake, not physically, but they are burning him in media for what
Right.
he's discovering. Yeah. It's the same concept where it's like, you have science doing what the church used to do.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah.
We had a question a little bit ago from Mary. She's talking about astral projecting. She says, how do you know to come back once you enter it, if and when you do?
From my understanding, you have a silver cord that you can come back to your body with. Now, I haven't successfully astral projected before. Um, when I was a kid, when I was 14, I what I was trying to do, I was actually trying to time travel. So I believe real time travel has more to do with meditation and the consciousness than it would have to do with like a physical machine or something like that. So, using stacked time theory, if you, and the idea that all time is here, if you can tune your frequency, your bodily frequency, into another moment in time, then you would be able to go and visit. And the trick is being able to maintain that for a while. So, when I was 14 years old, we had the previous year moved from Massachusetts to Ohio, and I was homesick. So, inspired by the movie Somewhere in Time, where Christopher Reeve had willed his consciousness back to from 1980 back to 1912, I deduced that I was going to attempt to will myself back in time, little over a year, so I could go and visit my friends back in Massachusetts one last time. So I was lying in bed doing this one night, and I entered into this deep meditative state, having no idea really what it was that I was doing. But looking back on it, I was in this deep meditative state, and I started feeling these undulating waves back and forth, which, at first was fine. But then I started feeling this like electrostatic tingly feeling, and that spooked me. And boom, I came out of it. So as an adult, talking with a number of people, doing some research, come to find out I was on the verge of having an out of body experience and projecting, but I never quite got there. I've tried doing it again in my adult life, but I got so much stuff going on in my head these days. It's really, really hard for me to get into that meditative state.
Yeah, I understand. And you have to be in a very clear space to be able to do that. And when you have
Mhm.
as many things as people like you have going on, it's hard to get to that quiet, right?
It is. It really is. But I do meditate every day, but yeah, it's just lot of noise going on in my head. Yeah.
Yep. I get it. You had mentioned a little earlier about Atlantis.
Yeah.
Where do you think it is?
Well, okay. So when we talk about where is Atlantis,
Right.
people are essentially asking, where do you think the famous ringed capital city is? With all the concentric rings and the water and all that stuff. Because Atlantis was a civilization that spread across a good part of the earth. When
Right.
you actually dive into the Atlantis story, they had 10 different provinces ruled by 10 different kings under one central government. But this stretched, past Egypt and other places throughout Europe, and other places throughout Africa and all of that, and even into Asia a bit. So it was a worldwide culture that spread out a bit. So the question is, where do you think the capital city is? And I've seen a lot of theories and ideas and guesses as to where it may have been, and most of them really just don't work.
Right.
So I I I hmm, I can't say specifically where it is. I just don't think that we have found it yet, and I think it's still out there to be found.
Right. And as you're talking about, they're an entire civilization, right? And I know that there's numerous stories out there. One being that they almost exploded the entire Earth and that they traveled potentially through stargates to another dimension to escape their own demise, right? What do you think of stories like that?
Well, I believe that the central island, the capital of Atlantis, had a palace. It's a large
Hmm.
palace, and within the middle of that palace was a shrine or a small temple to the god Poseidon, and you had like a holy of holies area there, back behind a gold wall and all this stuff. Um, and I believe, based on that description that we see and a lot of the Stargate symbolism and the construction that we see out there, that this housed a Stargate there on Atlantis. So when people talk about, the Atlanteans communicating with perhaps extraterrestrials or other things like this, or having that connection to the Anunnaki or the Shining Ones, and we see in the the Egyptian text from which the Atlantis story comes from, we see within there the interaction with the Shining Ones. So, yeah, I believe that that was a working Stargate, but we don't have a lot of detail as to how they would have specifically used it. Because basically, the story cuts off with Zeus getting ticked off at them, or if you take it back to the Egyptian story, basically it would have been like Atum, the creator god, who would have gotten angry with what they called the wretched state.
Right.
And that's when Plato's story just suddenly cuts off. We get more of those pieces within the Egyptian story and the destruction and how
Right.
the survivors had to go and rebuild.
Um, so with you speaking on that, there is another theory of the inner earth or center earth.
Mhm.
And that some say that insectoids led humans down there during the flood to keep them. This is one of those things that it's like, was the flood caused by Atlantis? Was the flood really just something that God caused, or, anything
Well,
like that? What do you think of the
yeah.
inner earth theory?
Well, we definitely have places within the earth that are massive and cavernous. I don't believe in the whole, we've got two gaping holes at the two of the poles, and you can go fly down in there, and there's an inner sun and all that. No, I'm not into that. But as far as there being hollowed places of the earth, some very large, like old magma chambers and lava tubes and things like that. Yeah, absolutely. We definitely have those areas within the earth. Now, are there other civilizations and things like that living within them? Very possibly. And yeah, you see those origin stories of the ant people or the mantoids or things like that through like a lot of indigenous legends, like around there in the American Southwest, Montezuma's well and castle. That well um, was supposed to be the entry point to one of those locations in which the ant people basically took human survivors down into. Now, if there was a great flood, well, that big opening in the ground, I mean, it would have flooded with water. So I believe that, yeah, while that may have been the entry point to it, I believe it may have been some sort of portal or Stargate taking them to, maybe it was another dimension here or something like that here on Earth, where they could live and survive for a while until everything subsided. Now, what caused that? Um, we're not sure. That's a hotly debated topic as far as what caused that flooding or cataclysm. Even those, um, like you have people that believe in the comet impact theory. You have some people that believe it was a massive solar flare that just all of a sudden caused massive heating and the ice sheets melted and things like this. So we don't really know exactly what it was, but something happened. And what's interesting, excuse me, when we look into the Atlantis story, when Solon is down there in Egypt getting the story, the Egyptian priests are telling him, because Solon's trying to tell, oh yeah, let me tell you about the Great Flood and the survivors of the flood, and the priests down there are laughing. Like, Solon, and it is funny to read, and I do include this in the book. You're like, Solon, you Greeks are but children. You basically tell me you really don't know what's going on here. You're talking about one flood. There have been many floods, many cataclysms over the
Right.
years, which basically, you've had to restart civilization. And your learned Greek people up there, you basically got killed and wiped out, and your unlearned shepherds and mountain people, had to restart civilization and didn't know all the stories and histories. They only, knew of the one because that's what they lived and experienced. So, yeah, so you're finding this story that there were many, many, many cataclysms that kept wiping out civilization, and it had to restart and rebuild again.
Right. So we have someone rewinding us a little bit. He's coming
All
back
right.
to the TR3Bs. He says, do you think the TR3Bs are designed by humans, aliens, or could they be a hybrid design? Persistent rumors are that the US Space Force has a few in their inventory.
Yeah, I mean, it could go any way, right? So, I mean, it could
Right.
even be that, it's something built by the United States based on alien technology that they've been working on for decades because of, crash material that they
Right.
found and all of that. So I don't have a definitive answer for that. I mean, all of those options are really on the
Very
table.
viable. Mary asked, "What is your view on the Bermuda Triangle? I'd love to hear about it."
Um, I mean, it's there. Yeah. It's
There's a lot
with
to talk
you.
about with the
There
Bermuda
is.
Triangle.
Yeah. Yeah, there really is. Yeah, I mean,
So
it's one of those hotspot places on the earth, one of Ivan T. Sanderson's vile vortices, kind of like what we were talking about earlier, where
right.
you have that earth energy rising up, and depending on what's there, in the crust of the earth just under, it's creating these different electromagnetic fields. And it's a lot of people wonder, well, we have cruise ships and planes and stuff like that going through it today, and they're fine. And well, yeah, I mean, for the most part, stuff kind of you know works its way through it just fine. Same with Alaska, same with other triangle areas. But sometimes the conditions become just right where something unusual and bizarre happens, and these areas of the world have more of those things happening than other places of the world.
Exactly. Jose said, "What is your opinion on shadow people and what are they made up of, especially if they look more solid and not always ghostly or wispy?"
Yeah, so that's a question I get a lot, and there's no one single answer for what is a shadow person, because they can be a
Right.
lot of different things. I mean, they can be a human spirit not fully manifesting as an apparition. They can be an interdimensional being. They can be an extraterrestrial. They can be an astral projection. They can be a light being. All these different things that they can be. So I have a whole book that dives into all those different ideas. But basically, what it comes down to is the way that our eyes are interpreting the light, and basically their energy as it comes into our dimension, because we only see into a very narrow band of the entire spectrum. And we what when they manifest here, it's so basically we're talking about a lot of different types of species using the same energetic modality to come into our world, our dimension.
Mhm.
And it's just the way that our eyes are interpreting that light or lack of light, that's coming from them. Yeah.
Exactly. That's a very good explanation, way better than what I would have gave. um, I want to come back to portals a little bit, coming back to your book.
Sure.
Um, do you think that Stonehenge is a portal? They recently came out and said that they know where the actual stones originate from, but why were they formed that way? What do you think it is?
Right. They're saying the altar stone came from Scotland now, which puts it out much
Yes.
further than they originally thought. And some people believe there had been a second altar stone, or there may be a second altar stone that's buried there. Um, Yeah, so Stonehenge, I mean, hotly debated as to what it was used for. Was it a calendar? Was it, all of these different things? Um, so when the ancients built these stone circles, they were harnessing the energy of the earth. And I believe they were using them for a number of different things. Like healing. You have that frequency that can heal people, or use
Yes.
sound energy in conjunction with those stones. Certainly, they were performing rituals. Yes, and things are lining up celestially at a lot of these places. Whether it's depending on the stone circle, whether it's a winter solstice or a summer solstice or an equinox somewhere, they all line up celestially. People are using them to enter into altered states of consciousness. So a lot of these different things. As far as being a portal, yeah, that's definitely on the table too. And there's a fascinating story about Stonehenge. I mean, it's become like a piece of folklore, almost like an urban legend, because there's not a lot of evidence to back it up. But the story still permeates that in the early 1970s, when you used to be able to actually walk up to Stonehenge and just, you could camp out there if you wanted to. And
Right.
there was a group of young adults that did one night. They set up, a couple little tents, and they had a little fire going and all this stuff. And they're having a good time. But a storm rolled in late that night, and um, all of a sudden, a bolt of lightning hit one of the stones. The sky lit up blue. You heard these screams, and then nothing. There was a policeman that was walking by at the time, and there was a local farmer that kind of, rushed up onto the scene. What happened? What's going on? And all of the young adults, all the I want to call them kids because of my age, but basically they're like 20-year-olds, young 20-year-olds. They just were gone. They had all disappeared. So it's like, okay, did that lightning activate a portal or a stargate that had long been dormant there and just whisk them off somewhere? It's possible.
Right.
Yeah.
Um, Thank you for that insight on that, because
Sure.
that's one of those things I have not looked up very much. We're coming to the end of our show. What kind of snippet from your book do you want to give to our audience to get them to go out and buy it?
Oh, you want me to read something? Is that what you're asking for?
If you want to read something, or if you just want to give a little insight on something that they can expect from reading it, whatever your preference
Um,
is.
yeah, I mean, I can just kind of break down the way the book is put together. So, yeah, the first chapter dives into what a stargate actually is. It starts with essentially what a portal is, the fact that yes, we do actually have portals that we research now, what NASA's been doing with that, and then what a stargate is based on that portal technology and the type of uses that stargates have. Then I get into portals out in the wilderness, where you have all the missing people cases. I get into, well, I have some insight there from like Ronnie LeBlanc from Expedition Bigfoot and some of those sorts of stories of, are these type of cryptid beings using portals to move from their dimension to our world. Get into like a lot of interesting legends and lore like Hoyabacha Forest and things like this. Um, and then I get into, let's see, it's from there I get into the stone circles and spirals. So, like we were just talking about with Stonehenge, Rollright stones, Avebury, Drombeg stone circle out in Ireland, and then the spiral pattern is really our ancient symbol for portals, and we find this symbol all over the world. We get into the energized earth, the earth energy when we're talking like the triangles, the vile vortices, and those sorts of things, ley lines, all of that. From there, I get into stargates in specific areas. So the American Southwest, how we find them like Chaco Canyon, the symbolism of Petroglyph National Monument, what we were just talking about there with Montezuma as well, and some other locations there like Sedona. Next chapter after that is Stargates of Ancient Egypt. So, given that I do a lot of
Mhm.
tours out there with that specific name, you can imagine the wealth of knowledge that's in there. So I actually show, this. Here's the Stargate symbolism. Here are the temples where these are found at, in all of that material there. And then the final chapter is the Atlantean origins and how the legends of Atlantis tie into all of this. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, for our listeners here, if you look in the comments under the name host, that's my Amazon storefront. I have all of Mike's books in my storefront. Please feel free to go get them. This book, Portals to the Stars, I'm almost all the way through it, and it's an amazing read. I haven't been able to put it down. I highly recommend it. And Mike, how can our viewers follow you? Where can they
Yeah,
find you
very
at?
easy. I mean, you can go to my website, MikeRicksecker.com. That's got links to all my books, my events, like the tours, my speaking engagements, all that is out there. Sign up for my newsletter. Also connecteduniverseportal.com. That is a online learning site for all this material and a community site as well. So yeah, lots and lots of information and stuff out there. So, and then of course social media, like Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Twitter X, all those places. Yeah.
I've linked all of those in the chat for our followers, Mike. It has been an absolute pleasure having you here, and I thank you so much for giving us space and time with you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Christina. This was a really wonderful conversation. Your viewers there had some wonderful questions, so I appreciate it.
Awesome. Family, thank you so much for joining us today. As always, make sure you lead with love, and we'll see you next week.